Guys, do we have everybody on? Sorry, mine was not letting me in. Looks like we got everybody there. Hillary, you want to go ahead and get things started? Do we have the meeting recording, Kathleen? Okay. Sorry, I'm on my cell phone because my computer didn't want to go.
Sure. Yeah, well
Yeah,
then,
it's recording. Thanks.
Thank you.
But we're not live streaming because I don't have access to the City of Lawrence YouTube account. So
It's fine. We don't need that. We'll
okay.
placed up later. So thank you.
great. Should I go ahead and get started then?
Yep, go for it.
Okay. I will formally call the May 19th Connected City Advisory Board meeting to into session. I don't know if I'm using the right language, but and the first thing on the agenda is to approve the minutes from the April 21st meeting. Does anybody have any comments on those? None. Okay, can some, or do, anyone want to entertain a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes of the April meeting.
I need a second too.
I second the motion.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion passes unanimously. Introduced by member Kuzmiak, seconded by member Andrus. Okay, we'll go on to the first agenda item on the Vision Zero Safety or Transportation Safety Action Plan. I think that's probably Jessica. Hi, Jessica.
Hello. Just give me a second. Let me share. You probably want to see my presentation. Figure out how that's going to work here for me. All right. Except for that is not what I'm trying to share with you. So that will be a problem. And I can't even see what I'm sharing. Just a second. I'm having trouble with my monitors. Okay, now you can see my presentation, yes?
Yeah, we saw it a second time
before?
as well.
Oh, well, thank you for that. That wasn't telling, my computer was not telling me that. So,
You were
okay.
good.
Well, I'm here today to talk a little bit about the work that we've had ongoing as part of our Vision Zero Transportation Safety Action Plan. And I'm going to present to you tonight kind of the findings in our report and look for some additional action. We have a second item on the agenda that's related to this as well, kind of our follow-up and implementation. But we began this process with Vision Zero. We'll talk a little bit about what Vision Zero is for those of you that may not be familiar, and safe systems approach. We'll talk about our community engagement and the work that we did in the community during the development of this planning process. We'll show you some high-level findings and strategies, and then we'll talk about our the desire for a commitment to zero, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions you may have. This approach around Vision Zero and the safe systems approach acknowledges that there's human vulnerability and error. And by designing a transportation system, we can minimize the consequences of these mistakes. And so while a traditional focus would focus on crashes where the road user is responsible, safe systems focuses on fatalities and serious injuries, where agencies and organizations are responsible as policymakers, planners, and engineers who build systems. Safe systems is a proactive, systemic approach to creating a safe road network and system. So streets are designed to prevent crashes and reduce severity when they do occur. Travel speeds are safer because they're more appropriate for the context and the user mix. We can leverage technology and standards to protect all road users, particularly in regards to safe vehicles and We encourage safe behaviors through education and outreach for all road users. And then there's an improving response system to save lives after the crash and care. And so this is a newer, probably in the last few years, approach to thinking about safety. And it's something that the Safe Streets and Roads for All, the federal grant that we received to fund this project, frames its work around. A safety action plan gives us the opportunity to go through this conversation with the community. It's a data-driven approach. It shows data-driven strategies where we've established a vision and strategies then to create and implement a plan and continue to monitor progress in an ongoing way. So during our process, we had a survey open last year for a few months. We promoted that at several pop-up events. This plan was included Lawrence, but it also included Eudora and Baldwin City. We're going to talk about, highlight, and focus on the Lawrence elements of that today for you. We got 211 responses to the survey. The majority of those resided in Lawrence. And we had some key takeaways really about people and their preference for car as their automobile choice based on convenience. Safety, and that's what people told us, safety was important to respondents, and distracted driving was a high level concern for people. And respondents were very interested in design or engineering solutions to support safety. So you can see the majority of our participants who responded are using the car as their mode, and convenience is a key indicator. So the thing that I think we have to think about in regard to that is, if convenience is the main factor influencing people's transportation choices, it gives us an understanding about what's most important when designing and implementing effective solutions. We talked with the community about what barriers maybe prevent you from biking or walking. And so lack of facilities and connectivity is high on that list in terms of safety concerns, but also other things in terms of motivation, convenience, weather, and physical abilities. And that, again, just gives us some additional understanding about, and I think supports some of our notions, which we already knew, which is build it and they will come, and kind of seeing people's response to desire to have connected networks in that space. This graphic shows the support for engineering, but not far behind support for additional law enforcement and education. And there's in all of the plans and documents we do there's a public engagement appendices, so you can go and click on the link to the plan and view all of the comments and their robustness. We're highlighting at a high level some of the common themes that we heard from people in regard to solutions they would like to see as part of this campaign. The thing about Vision Zero over the past 5 years, when we looked at 2018 to 2022 data, we revealed some patterns in crash severity and distribution. In Lawrence, the high injury network, which we'll talk about in more detail, but it spans just under 32 miles, and it represents just 6.5% of the city's total roadway network, yet it accounts for 64.8% of the injury crashes and 66.2% of the fatal and disabling crashes. So the high injury network includes a mix of high-speed arterials, busy downtown streets, and key intersections with complex traffic patterns. And so that's really the focus of this work in this data-driven approach, is looking at where there's high distribution of the crash severity and a distribution density of some of these crashes. And so by targeting your resources in a way to this high injury network, that's really the approach we're taking to look at based on this data-driven approach. The first network here I'm going to show you is Lawrence's high injury network. This is the high injury network for all modes. You can look in the plan, and there's also a separate high injury network just for vulnerable road users alone, and that's bicycle and pedestrian users only for those crashes. But you can see these were street segments identified with high concentrations of severe crashes. It's a smaller portion of the roadway network in terms of all of our street mileage, but accounts for a larger position. And so some key corridors in this space were Iowa Street, which serves as US 59, 23rd Street, Massachusetts Street, some high injury sections. You can see, in this mix also in terms of 6th Street, 23rd Street, and in some intersections. Those are called out specifically in the plan. I think number one is, 23rd in Massachusetts, of which you'll see there's some recommended action strategy in the plan. And conveniently, it's a corridor we're working on design of right now. So there'll be an opportunity for us to see more near-term improvement. There's also in the plan top ranked corridors, and ranked corridors shape a strategic and system focused approach that allows us, they're discussed all of each of the corridors that are in the high level of this ranking are discussed specifically detail in the plan with additional details about crash risk and crash type or operational details. And those corridors include 23rd Street, 9th Street, 6th Street, Iowa /US 59, Kentucky, Tennessee, Vermont, and 19th and 21st. So that can kind of give you an idea. There's a lot more detail in the plan regarding some of these top ranked corridors based on the data and the crash history for serious injury and fatality crashes. One of the key factors that the Safe Streets and Roads for All program is looking for was also just continued transparency and continuity of the use of crash data, and over time being able to account for projects and changes that may occur after projects in relationship to crash histories. And so we have stood up a dashboard, a Vision Zero dashboard, to represent those crash data in the high risk locations. We're working in our final stages to implement the upcoming and completed safety projects to be able to begin that storytelling of the looking at before and after some of those effects. But the intent of this is public transparency and accessibility to crash data that we receive from KDOT. And so we'll have this up and available and linked for you once we get a final transfer of this from our consultant team for you to be able to use in your work here, but also the community at large. And we'll work through continuing to make sure this is updated and tracking progress as we work through implementing Vision Zero. There's a number of strategies for each community in the plan detail table list. And there's all the way from ongoing strategies, which are the things that are going to be ongoing implementation actions. And then there's short, medium, and long term. And these are kind of phased over a series of the level of intensity that they really get into and the level of additional work that they're going to require in terms of concept design, engineering, or other factors in that strategy. And so in each of those, some examples, I think I'll just highlight at a high level for you, is going to be things like the intersection all the way from specific intersection improvements like 23rd and Massachusetts Street of removing sweeping westbound right turn movements, recommendations around implementation and of leading an investigation of leading pedestrian intervals for safe routes to school crossings at signalized intersections. Recommended locations for hybrid beacons, additional corridor studies for concept development for installing, whether that's raised medians or access management or lighting. And then there's a variety of different policy work that's recommended from updating the non-motorized prioritization to consider ranking or scoring weighted to areas on our high injury network, a quick builds project policy, or updating the complete streets checklist in regards to some factors around whether it's on a high injury or vulnerable road user high injury network. And those are considerations that we could have in some policy development. There's a lot of strategies, and it will have to continue to work to integrate, I think, how we think about safety in all of our plans and projects and work. And so that will be the coming steps, I think, as we see implementation after adoption of Vision Zero. But for the city of Lawrence particularly, we're looking at a resolution for consideration by the City Commission that would be a commitment to 0 traffic deaths and serious injuries by 2050. And so you can kind of see the time frame in the plan, and that's kind of the plan for the resolution. And looking at that commitment, it aligns with our long range plan time frame, Transportation 2050, and recognizes that without some additional likely federal investment for implementation, we are going to continue to need additional resources to make this plan a reality and that commitment. I'd be happy to entertain any questions you may have about our Vision Zero Transportation Safety Action Plan at this time.
I have one. Oh, Katie, go ahead.
No, it's fine.
Last month, one thing we heard from MSO was that one of their goals is to get traffic as quickly as possible across town. And a lot of those are on, it looks like, some of the high injury networks. How do those two pieces reconcile?
Well, I think they're in conflict. And so I don't think they reconcile. I think that's part of the conversation we need to have in terms of balancing speed and volume of traffic along with the considerations of safety and crossing movements. And that's always a conversation we have to have. I do think there's opportunities where we can use design to help aid in safety. And so things like access management or raised medians or even signal timing, like leading pedestrian interval, is a good opportunity where we can use technology and design to improve safety while not conflicting entirely with the idea that we still need to move people and we have a responsibility to ensure that goods and services and people can get it around in our community, but that everybody can do so safely. So I think they are often in conflict, and those are going to be conversations that we have to continue to have as we look at how we are going to build our streets for all of our community to use.
You may have mentioned this and I may have missed it, but what was the metric to by which a street or an area qualifies as high injury?
Okay, so there's high injury, there's high risk. And so in the plan documentation, there's a whole methodology that describes how they're looking at high injury network. But the first off, it's not looking at all crashes overall. The old traditional method just said, how many crashes are there? And in this case, we're looking at the most vulnerable crashes and crashes that cause injury and fatalities to people, in the sense that you're probably in a system always going to have crashes. And so the work that we need to do under Vision Zero is to ensure that we don't have loss of life and loss and injury in that space. That crashes, if we can make crashes less severe and we can keep people safer, then those are the areas that we will have the most. By looking at those areas where we have crashes in those spaces, we'll have a lot of opportunity to improve life for people, quality of life for people. I think then also there's a high risk network. And so sometimes just because a crash hasn't occurred there, the operational characteristics of the street operate in a similar way to a location that is more high risk. And there's an entire analysis that looks at risk factors. And I can't go into all the detail, but I think you can read through the thing and see that when looking at where crashes occur versus where crashes don't occur in some different metrics across our system, there's over 20 factors that have risk factors assessed to them. And those types of things then are used to evaluate the whole system as a whole to understand where we also have high risk in the system, where we might need to think about, as we're continuing to do work, strategies that are known life-saving countermeasures, that we could use those as strategies as we think about design of our roadways.
I had another quick question. I noticed that with Eudora and Baldwin, this makes sense, I guess, because they're smaller, but that the concentration of where the percentage of injuries that are occurring are in a much smaller concentration area. And I was just curious where that is in Baldwin, just because I have family there.
Oh, sure. Well, so in the plan,
And one of them keeps getting into car wrecks.
oh
So
my goodness gracious. Well, Yeah, in the PDF of the plan, it's on page 34. And so
Okay.
in Baldwin City, you're mostly looking at US 56 is the majority, and a small section of 6th Street
That's what I wondered.
is where the high injury network is.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah. But yes, and in both of those communities, there haven't been fatality accidents within the date range of the crashes we were looking at, and the sample size of their crash population of quantities is a lot lower also. So
I have a ton of questions, but I don't know if I should go for it or if anybody else. Nick, do you want to go?
A quick one, maybe. I think it's more just on the outreach process. So I was personally surprised to see the 75% of people say that engineering solutions are their, I guess, favored method. I feel like that doesn't square with the rhetoric I've heard around people feeling even slightly inconvenienced about having smaller lanes or roundabouts or, God forbid, access control.
yeah.
So it feels to me very similar to, like, yes, we need more housing and apartments in Lawrence, but not in my neighborhood. Is that kind of your impression of what's
Yeah.
going on here?
Well, two things. One, our sample size is really small for number of survey respondents. We did, and Nick, you're familiar with our previous outreach efforts, but for those of you that aren't, we do hours and hours of tabling to try to talk to people. We stand at tables and are at the library or all of these public events and tell every person, come talk to us about this. Do you have interest? This was one of the hardest things that I've ever tried to ask people about, because a lot of people would say, no, I don't bike or walk, or like things like that. I'm like, well, this isn't just about people who bike with, this is about roadway safety for everyone. And for some reason, people just didn't connect with that in a very meaningful way. I mean, 200 responses is like, we put in a lot of effort. We extended the survey time. We sent emails to everybody. Like that is low for
It's
for the
effectively a
expectation of our
convenience
work.
sample, as you said, that's based on
Yeah.
people who actually do care about
Yeah.
it. It's not statistically useful.
It's not. It's not. And so you have to take that, all of the feedback we got through that lens. I think that, in this case, it's a very small sample size. Not without a lack of effort, we tried to get additional engagement. It just didn't happen for this process. And I don't know what else is going on in the world, in terms of last summer where people were just distracted or had other stuff going on. So I would say first, we have to think about it like that. But I do think once we talk about specific strategies and it relates to traffic calming and people's ability to drive, that is very true, that it's very much like everyone else is the traffic when it's really you are the traffic. And that's also a common sentiment, I think, that we have to deal with as we do this work, that it really, until you get into some of the more specific implementation and you can show crash reduction factors and justification for something that's in concept or design, we're going to continue to have these conversations about values. But that's what Vision Zero can bring to the table, is our overall effort in regards to telling the narrative and the story about saving lives.
It'll be interesting to see how it goes, because I feel like I'm having some flashbacks to the land development code update process where there was a ton of engagement on the earlier end. And I think maybe it's just too conceptual and abstract for people to really think about how it'll affect them until they get a concrete design project and they're like, oh, that's what you meant? No, absolutely not. I wonder if it's just easy to think of in abstract terms, but difficult to actually comprehend once it may inconvenience you slightly. I feel like a lot of the education may have to center on the fact that things that seem like they would be inconveniencing to drivers end up actually being a better thing for everybody, including drivers. And it's counterintuitive, but stuff like, losing a lane or even going from one way to two ways, in some cases actually can increase throughput, even if it looks like it's less, because maybe it seems more congested or it seems slower. Like, yeah, but you are getting more cars through there. And it's really counterintuitive. So I don't know, you have your work cut out for you, I guess is what I'm saying. But I'm glad to see that at least for now, people are interested in the engineering changes. So we'll see.
Okay. I have a slew of them, Jessica. Okay. So a couple of things. The action plan really focuses on intersections, and at least, I'm thinking right now about corridors and roads. And I know the conflict point comes at the intersection, but frequently we see cyclists riding on sidewalks because there's not on-street protected bike infrastructure. And because they're separated or they're on a shared use path and they're off to the side and they're not, like, cars aren't paying attention to them, that's where a collision will happen. So it's not necessarily that the intervention is at the intersection. It's like the data that's leading to that, right? Like the absence of that infrastructure leads to that. And so, I mean, I saw like in part of the report, like ADA compliant sidewalks were at higher risk of crash, right? And that's because wheelchair users are using them as opposed to non-ADA sidewalks. So it's like not necessarily the intersection that needs the intervention, even though that's where the crash is occurring, right? Like I'm thinking about like let's take a step back from just intersection intervention and think about like why is that crash occurring there? Maybe it's right turn on red, things like that, where maybe there's not leading pedestrian signals or whatnot. And I know that's contemplated later, but just, you know, I'm putting that bug in your ear, and I think I've talked to you about this before, but the next one was when I look at the action plan on, so this is related to what we'll be talking about for the executive summary for the Safe Streets application for road safety audits on 6th and 23rd. And I saw that the high injury network analysis focuses on Iowa, 23rd, Mass, 6th and 9th. And on page 22, there's a concentration of pedestrian crashes on South Iowa, 59, right where that shopping area is. And, you know, I'm wondering, there was 14 there, and on 6th and Casel.
That's not number of crashes, that's how they rank.
Oh.
Those numbers on that are how they rank.
I see. Okay.
Yes. Sorry.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Okay.
Because I was looking at that, like there was the number of crashes there. I assume
That's a ranking. Sorry, I realize that now. Yes.
That's okay. And the dashboard will show us the number, you know, like in crash data, right?
Yeah, you'll be able to see individual crashes. Like you can click on them and there's additional information attributes with that, with the point data.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, then my comment about South Iowa may not be relevant, right? Because it ranks pretty low. Let's see, on 9th, hold on, let me get to this. So on page, what is this? I guess 30 of the report, it talks about the segment between New Hampshire and Vermont experiencing a lot of density. And I know the Jayhawk watershed project is just interventions are from Tennessee to Illinois, and so don't include that section between New Hampshire and Vermont. I wonder if anything has been contemplated for those areas in terms of, you know, interventions that could coincide with the Jayhawk watershed.
Dave, are you on? Would you have any other comments about that?
We haven't looked at that section at all. The Jayhawk watershed project, I think we get down to Vermont Street, but no, we haven't looked at anything east of Vermont. So
let's see. Oh, this is kind of a technical question, but there's a reference on page 76 to converting 5-section doghouse signal indications. What are those?
Dave, you got that one.
yeah. It's just a kind of a term for the way the signal looks. So it's basically you have the stop and then there's the yellow and the green below with the arrows. And so we've been phasing those out and putting in the leading the left, the flashing left turn arrows.
Okay.
So there might be a few of those left in the community, but not a whole lot. But yeah, it's just basically swapping out the signal heads for something that's a little more common these days.
Got it. Okay. And then Yeah, I mean, and maybe we'll talk about this in a little bit, but I would love to hear, and I know we'll talk about this a little bit more, but like the 6th Street, 23rd Street corridors and where they are in the high injury network. Are there any more details you can share? Because I can't dial into like the number of crashes. I can't see it in the action plan. Do you have any information on that?
I don't have that quantitatively pulled, like for the work that we're going to be doing to tell the story for the grant application. That's like work that we're doing,
Yeah,
but I don't have that right this moment.
okay. And it'll be in the dashboard too, right? We'll see all of that when that comes out. My next question was in the crash analysis, I see that like they did time of day, the crash type, like, you know, the side angle stuff, you know, time of year. Was age ever incorporated into analysis? Do you know?
We don't have it in the report. It's something that we can ask for, and it's something that we can obviously make an additional table for. I know we've looked at it before around conversations um, with other safety studies we've looked at, especially being in a college town, comes to play into that conversation.
Yeah, I think age would be good to have from, I mean, they can pull that data pretty easily. They should be able to pull it, I think. And then I don't know if there's any mapping about like that they are doing with like poverty levels and census tracts and crashes or later in that. Do you know?
Yes, there's changing requirements in this space related to federal correspondence we have received. And so there is some documentation still in the WSP section of the crash report that it talks about. I think it identifies them as disadvantaged communities, but under additional guidance, that's conversation about whether or not that all is going to remain in relationship to expectations where we've been um, requested to remove those items.
Okay. I think we should still see that stuff. We should really know where disadvantaged populations are being hit because we know that pedestrians and cyclists are more likely to be low income, right? Like that they don't have an alternative means of transportation. And so I think it's really important that we know where low income folks are being injured or killed.
We are working with our state and federal partners to understand what demographic data is going to be acceptable to use as we continue to do transportation planning to represent the needs of our community.
Thanks. Thank you for your work on that. Those were all my questions. Thanks for this. Any other questions from folks? Comments? Ryan or everybody else I can see, but did you have any questions, Ryan?
Doesn't for me. Sorry, my camera's not working, but thanks for the presentation.
Okay. Any public comment on this agenda item? Okay, hearing none. Looks like the action is to vote to approve the draft action plan. Does someone want to make a motion?
City board approves the, what's it called? The not Vision Zero, right? Vision Zero action. It's similar to Safe Street Stall, but it's not the exact same thing, right? But this is officially the Vision Zero action plan, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. In the grant, you are funded to create a safety action plan. It's a Vision Zero. We realize there's other Vision Zeros in our community, so we put the word transportation in here also.
Oh, it's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Popular term. Okay.
Did you make a motion? No, I didn't.
Flick through. I would motion that the Connected City Advisory Board approves the Vision Zero transportation plan.
I second that motion.
All those in favor say aye.
Right.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Jessica. I think you're probably on number 2 as well.
That would be true. So we have for your consideration this evening to review our executive summary, our concept for what we're calling Safety First, a corridor study and leading pedestrian interval demonstration, where we are seeking or hoping to seek 2025 Safe Streets and Roads for All grant funding. These are concepts supported in our Vision Zero Safety Action Plan to continue to lay the groundwork at eliminating fatalities and serious injuries. And we're looking at road safety audits, some additional work that we would need to do in terms of concept and engagement. When we do this level of corridor study work, we would need to do additional engagement with property owners and people that are specifically in these spaces, particularly considering how the engagement went on our larger plan. We want to make sure that before we're proposing and seeking to fund additional things that would change access or medians or crossing improvements, that we've done a more intense review and engagement with those populations. And so we'd be looking at this process to do those 6th Street and 23rd Street corridors. They lie within the high injury network and they're hotspots due to heavy traffic and wider roadways in some spaces and the conflict between user types. And so we'd like to evaluate opportunities for improvements and do some concept work in these spaces and to do that engagement to come up with a more specific plan that we can then seek implementation funding for. We would also like to, at the same time, pilot leading pedestrian intervals, particularly in downtown and at safe routes to school signalized intersections. FHWA research shows a 13% reduction in pedestrian crashes, and we'd like to demonstrate that and establish local policy about the appropriate use of leading pedestrian intervals, which we only currently have in a few intersections that I'm aware of based on some specific safety concerns at this point. But we felt like this was an opportunity to get pedestrians to get a head start with a green light to improve visibility and safety at many of these crossings, especially as safe routes to school crossings of arterial streets is more and more frequent with larger boundaries for some of our schools. So that's what we're looking at for this process. The plan, in the financials of that, we're seeking Build Kansas funding support for match, and we are putting together an entire budget to support this whole initiative. But we're looking tonight for a letter of support for our application to USDOT for this effort. I'll also note that it looks like staff added public comment received today, and that was provided to you, written public comment on the agenda in relationship to comment that's been received. Be happy to entertain any questions or discussion about our proposed projects.
Can you talk to me a little bit more about leading pedestrian intervals and maybe how like right turn on red could conflict with that? Like the signal staying red, the pedestrian, or will they not be are they going to be mid-block crossings? Kind of where will they be oriented?
Dave, I'm gonna let you answer that if you can, and then we can talk more about the location of them.
Yeah, well, essentially it gives the pedestrians the ability to start walking across the crosswalk before it gives the green light for the through traffic. So it's maybe similar to, it has a similar effect to improving safety as a right turn on red may do in instances. So that would be an engineering decision after we were looking at turning movements and timing and things like that, a little more in detail. So as we're looking at the supplemental planning phase, that's something that we can look at some of these intersections, is that if that would be a beneficial treatment to improve safety. I think particularly like in the downtown region or areas where you have a lot of pedestrians, it's pretty common to see that in communities where you have a lot of pedestrians and crossing the street and as many or more than vehicles. But it can be done anywhere. It's just a matter of just looking at the volume of and the timing and all the details for each intersection.
So as part of this grant, I think based on the recommendations and the things we heard in the process around safe routes to schools and more arterial crossings, because remember that happened just before this Vision Zero work happened in terms of school boundaries in the prior years. So I think that those crossings in the downtown ones are at the top of our list where we would want to use this planning supplemental phase to demonstrate that and to test before and after and look at before and after in terms of timing and comfort and however we decide to do that in terms of engagement in addition to engineering decision, but then also look at what a policy might look like if there's other appropriate places in our community that would be appropriate.
Nick, do you want to go ahead? Thank you, guys.
Sure. It was kind of the same question, so I wonder if I can maybe add a little bit of clarity and detail to try to see what we're trying to ask here. I'm thinking of a specific case when you are trying to cross a street and it's not where a right turn on red could possibly happen. Like say, like very specifically, you're going north on Kentucky Street, you're going to take a left on 6 if you're a car, right? So there's no way you could possibly be going left westbound on 6th Street. If you were a pedestrian trying to cross there, which there isn't currently a controlled crosswalk, but if there was, I can definitely see how a leading pedestrian interval could help, because that is, there's no other time at which a car could be in conflict with you. But for the one going right, where there's a lot of right turns on red, do you think it might just even confuse some motorists who see a green something? They're like, oh, that's me. And off they go, when it's in fact just for the pedestrians. And it's still technically also right turn on red. I'm just kind of curious if there's any data out there showing that like at certain intersections, LPIs have no effect and at others, they're really effective.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I'm sure there's studies and data out there. But again, it really depends on the intersection and the context of the situation at the intersection. But, I think the main detriment, and it was talked about earlier, is like the prioritization between vehicles and throughput and pedestrians, because you're ultimately having a longer all red cycle where no cars are getting through. So it's, if you were, like on a corridor or a major arterial street like 6th Street, 23rd Street, that has a lot of signals, a lot of vehicular traffic that could have a bigger impact on the throughput of vehicles, and the timing of, from one intersection to the next intersection, because they're coordinated. But yeah, I'm sure there's studies that have been done that show that it's different. And I think if you're basically giving pedestrians say 3 to 5 second head start to cross the street, that they're should be safer. Now you could still have vehicles making right turns on red, whether it's allowed or not. So there's still conflict as long as people are obeying traffic laws. But yeah, no, I think it's something that we're really interested in looking into more here in Lawrence, and there's some certain areas that I think it could be beneficial. And
makes sense. Yeah, I think it sounds like a great tool, and I want to be optimistic. I guess the reason I was just kind of trying to ferret out more information is like, how cautiously optimistic should I be, right? Like, is it a silver bullet, or kind of, who knows? And it sounds like that's why we're doing a pilot, to try to figure out exactly how well it works. So it makes sense. Another question about, oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, Nick, part of the work we might need to do is just like what we did during the pedestrian plan, where after all the signal timings happened, we took people who use wheelchairs and other assistive devices and went out and experienced the new timings, because we heard common sentiment that there wasn't enough time to cross. And we actually went out and experienced it, and were able to report back that the timing wasn't the issue, that barely the timing felt comfortable. It was more just driver inattention or right turn on reds or these other things that impacted crossing and comfort and safety rather than timing. And so those types of experiences are insightful to us when we have opportunities to do this type of supplemental planning work, that it's very possible we can go and do the engagement that accompanies this work to be able to understand not only does it work from a data perspective and the engineering perspective, but how does it change people's perspective about how they use that space?
I think answers at least part of the other question I had, which was about the other, I guess the other bulleted item in the letter of support, and that is the road safety audits on 6th and 23rd Street corridors. So after reading through the action plan draft, there's like tables on tables of what seems to be fairly detailed ideas for how to improve stuff on 6th and 23rd Street, including the cost, the time frame, justification. I guess I'm just curious, what would more money get us? Would it basically refine these estimates, get more project ideas, or like be able to do the types of projects that we haven't even thought of yet?
So I think a couple of those things. I think, taking a more corridor approach allows us the opportunity to consider them all in relationship to each other. It allows, we looked at those specific the consultants specifically looked at those intersections because they were on some high crash or high ranked intersections in terms of crashes and conflicts. And they looked at it and just said, okay, we think maybe based on the crashes, you could look at this. That's very high level. It's like making a list of all the things in terms of that could be possible solutions. But it didn't include any, and if you think about like the work that we did on the 23rd Street corridor, where we really can have the opportunity to either charrette or open house and throw some of those things out to get more specific feedback and input from the people who live or work or own property along those corridors, I think is going to be needed before we're going to be able to go deploy an implementation successfully in some of those spaces. And so we envision the opportunity to do additional work in these spaces to build support for a more comprehensive approach, as opposed to just throwing some ideas at the wall, where we actually get an opportunity to look at if there's options, or we get an opportunity to look how they might all work together. Things like access management or other coordination often has to be a very highly coordinated approach. And admittedly, in our system-wide plan, we didn't have that level of interaction with property owners. And this would be that opportunity to do that, where we could deliver something we think more successfully in that space than just what we have now. What we have now is a starting point, but it's going to take us to do additional work in our community with our expectations around engagement to be able to, I think, build a more holistic project that we can go get grant funding for and support to implement.
Sounds really important also, because it does seem like sometimes the threshold of project size to actually qualify for grants has to be kind of large. Like you can't just say like, I want an ADA ramp here. It's got to be like, we want this for the entire city. So that makes a lot more sense as to why you'd want to look at that holistically. So, okay, thanks for that.
Other comments, questions?
I can do one more if nobody else is up.
Go ahead, Nick.
So I don't know how this fits in necessarily, but it sounds like what we're trying to propose to, I guess it's the U.S. Department of Transportation, is low-cost, high-impact, short-term strategies. When it comes to low-cost, high-impact, I feel like there's an opportunity perhaps to look at the engineering design standards and see what the design speeds are for different classifications of streets, and then match those to what we actually want the speeds to be in real life, and see if they make sense. Like, for example, a minor arterial is defined as having a minimum design speed of 35 to 45 miles an hour. But when you look at examples of minor arterials on the GIS map, you see things like Massachusetts Street from 11th to 23rd, which in no way do we want to be 35 to 45 miles an hour. So if we're designing it geometrically to be at that speed and be safe and comfortable, but then signing it for 30, we're setting ourselves up for failure. So I wonder if that could be a fairly low cost thing to do to at least buy us time in the meantime when new roads and streets come into being, I suppose, or get major overhauls. If we can at least set the guardrails such that we are having safe design speeds that match what we want to be the real life speeds.
Dave, do you have any thoughts about that?
No, I think it's I think that's a good observation to be able to look at the speeds, and it's also I always talk about the design of the street. Mass Street, 4 lanes. We're looking at, the project to go to 3 lanes. Similar on 9th Street, both are high on the high injury network, both ranked really high. And I think both of those projects here in the next couple of years to reconfigure the lanes on those streets should reduce crashes and improve safety. So I think it's a combination of the speed folks are driving and the ability to drive quickly, right? So we can't just go out on Mass Street today and put in a 30 mile per hour, 25 mile per hour sign and expect people to drive that speed. But if you reduce the lanes and make it, the volume, we don't think is going to really have much impact. It's not going to go down a lot, but you're going to have less lanes and it's still going to operate just fine. So I think that will have an impact on speeds, a much better impact on speeds than just re-signing it and lowering the speed limit. So I think it can be a combination of both. But yeah.
I think we're on the same page for the most part. It sounds like, we're both saying that it's the design of the street that influenced the speed. But if the design speed is required to be a minimum of a certain amount, then, the engineering calculations required to get you there is like, well, you need to have this amount of curvature and this amount of buffer space and all that kind of stuff. Like all the components of the street design need to be met to make that a safe driving speed. As I understand it, as not an actual transportation engineer, of course, but like, for example, like a simple tweak could be instead of minimum design speed, for example, it could be maximum design speed. So now, yeah, there's still maybe a couple of 45-mile-an-hour design speed minor arterials here and there. But now if you said, it's Massachusetts Street, it should probably be 25 at the max. Let's design this one for 25. Then you wouldn't be in violation of the standards and it would make contextual sense with the design. Whereas currently, if it's a minimum design speed, then even if you want it to be lower, like on Massachusetts Street, where it's signed for 30, you can't design it for 30 miles an hour. You still have to design it for 35 to 45 because you're hamstrung by the standards. So it seems like just like a little bit of tweak could really help us when these street project redesign projects do come up. It at least gives us the wiggle room to be able to actually design them for lower speed and say like, well, let's put a chicane in there because it's not going to hurt it, right?
Jessica, how much are we requesting in the grant application?
I think our total project estimate right now is like $400,000. But that's like the grant and the match and our Build Kansas request. It's all the funds together.
Mm-hmm. And how much can we apply for? What's the maximum amount? Do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. I'm looking at the info right now.
Yeah, you'd have to. Sorry.
It's okay. I'll look at it. Anybody else?
I mean, the limitation on our side is just that there's not at this point budgeted funds for, we'd have to find the money, the local part of that, in terms of there's not budgeted funds for this project yet. So depending on what the local impact is, we would have to figure out where that would maybe come from in an operating budget.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like the maximum you could request is 5 million.
Is that for a construction project?
This is the
Or is that
maximum
for
expected
demonstration?
award for planning and demonstration grants.
Okay. It's quite large.
Yeah, so I guess
Our challenge locally would be trying to ensure that we had the local commitment in a budget, and as it is now, there's not budgeted funds for this project, so it's going to have to, the funding is going to have to come out of somebody's operating budget.
Mm-hmm.
The part of the local match that's required locally from the city.
Can we get a higher amount?
Well, we have already submitted a Build Kansas request, and they do fund, I think, a percentage of your amount. I want to say it's like you have a 20% match for the project, and they'll fund a percentage of that. And so we have not a super high contribution planned, assuming they approve our application and we would get the funding. But when you look at those maximum amounts, like we wouldn't have capacity, I don't believe, to ask for $5 million, even if we had a project with that amount of work without additional conversation as part of budget. We would not be able to do that within the current framework we have. So there's considerations like that in addition to workload and staffing too, that are part of the consideration about what level of work and effort that we can take on as part of this initiative.
Yeah, I'm always like, let's ask for more. Melissa was once said, other people's money, you know?
Yeah.
Let's get as much as we can to do the work. But I get the staffing capacity.
I just know we've had other conversations internally about just how do you manage this? Where does this fit in the workload? There's trade-offs in that. If you're doing this work, you're not doing some other work. Where does that fit in terms of priorities and effort? And we built this proposed project with all of those considerations in mind to continue to advance these efforts, but also recognize there are limitations in all these spaces.
I just had a comment. I noticed when I reloaded the agenda that there was a public comment in there that I missed earlier. And I wanted to highlight that in case anybody didn't see it. Is it okay if I share my screen? I'm going to do it. Okay, so this public comment is from Sam Carter, requesting that in addition to the feasibility studies that you shared, Jessica, that these 3 corridors also, that we apply for funding for feasibility studies on those 3 corridors, West 33rd, 19th from Barker to O'Connell, and Michigan from 6th to River Ridge. I want to highlight his comment down here, recommending seeking funding for a complementary safety development plan that targets reductions in traffic violence that harms children, youth, and young adults. He said he noticed a disturbing trend that there's kids who live in mobile home developments are disproportionately affected by crashes. So if you haven't refreshed your agenda and read that, it might be worth doing that.
It looks like he's also on here, so whenever we open for public comment, he might be able to comment on that. Yeah, I was looking at that because there's several mobile homes near where I live, and it looks like those are a couple of the crashes listed on there.
So I would make a point of information that this map is not a location of the crashes. It says where where they lived. So it went back and it looks like they pulled addresses of where the people who were involved in those crashes lived, which is not an approach that Vision Zero takes in regards to looking at where the fatality or serious injury or crash occurred, because you're looking at the infrastructure where the risk and density of those are happening as a result of that. So this is a methodology not endorsed by Vision Zero, or not one that I've seen used.
However, it does bring us back to the important point of considering socioeconomic factors and considering how dangerous it is to move about a place.
Yes. And I would say both 23rd Street and 6th Street intersect those populations in our community, depending on which demographic you're looking at.
Okay, any other comments from board members? Okay, I'll open it up for public comment. Any public comment? Samuel Carter.
Hi, thank you. Yes, no, and thank you so much for the opportunity, and thanks for bringing up my comments. I really appreciate them. They were a little bit rushed, but if I may share my screen and provide just a little more background on that. Yes, okay, yeah. So just pointing that out for people, and Jessica's absolutely right. This is a map of the addresses right where people lived. But just for those who may be unfamiliar, there's a mobile home development here in the southwest, kind of near Walmart, far on 19th to the east. And there are more I have around North Michigan Road as well. The reason why I was looking at these data was because there is nationally there's a trend of people of lower socioeconomic status, minorities as well, who are more likely to be hit by drivers as they are pedestrians. Pedestrians is mostly to some extent cyclists. So I decided to see if I could look at that data locally. And I just started noticing over and over and over that a lot of the addresses were like lot, 13C, etc. And that's when I decided to look at it like this. And I don't know if it's necessarily kind of an approved methodology, but I'll say that looking at land use is something that is what many places are doing. The Washington State Department of Transportation and its safe system approach looks at land use as the kind of the sixth part of having safe land uses. So I think land use is absolutely a component. And it is also admittedly a little bit outside of Vision Zero, the Vision Zero idea of reducing severe and fatal crashes. I just would add that there are many things that we can do that can reduce crashes overall. May not be most directed at severe or fatal, but are still kind of a net positive. I think for instance you'd see that a lot in leading pedestrian intervals on Massachusetts Street would certainly in downtown would certainly reduce the number of crashes, and therefore would most likely reduce the likelihood of severe or fatal crashes, even if there aren't so many severe and fatal crashes happening on Massachusetts Street. That's just kind of why I was looking at the map, why I think land use is important. I think it's important to look at where people live. And I think just from equity perspective, it's valuable as well. And there are interventions that can be made with particularly the feasibility studies that can be basically part of a demonstration grant that can fund the design and I believe implementation of protected bicycle infrastructure, looking at 19th Street from Barker all the way to O'Connell, and then also the terminus of West 33rd up to Ousdall. There's like a new apartment complex going down here, which has another 1,000 people are moving or will be in Lawrence in this area. So I think it's a really important part of town to target. With that, though, of course, the reason why I added the stakeholder engagement and collaboration, because if you were going to, adopt this as a strategy, you would need to do targeted engagement in those communities. I like to think that protected bicycle infrastructure would be really good in these places, but I don't know if it's what the people there want. So I think you would have to do directed stakeholder and engagement and collaboration. And then lastly, the complementary safety plan development. When I looked at crashes by age, I noticed that even though younger people were more over the past 10 years, younger people were more likely to or are overrepresented in the data. Like more younger people generally are there are more crashes for that affect younger pedestrians and cyclists. The severity isn't as high as generally is not as high as it is for older folks. But I think there are still like lifelong effects that happen. I mean, I think we've all heard stories of people who got hit by a car when they were a teenager and then decided never to ride their bike again. That happened to my best friend when I was in middle school. And there's something kind of cruel about it, frankly. So I think that I think there's money on the table. I know the capacity is absolutely an issue, and I respect your judgment on that. But I'd encourage you to also seek funding for feasibility studies, for stakeholder engagement, and for a complementary safety plan development that looks at not just the severe crashes, but just all crashes for young people. I think that's all I have. Thank you. Sorry, I had to go a little quick. I got kids around.
Thank you. Other public comment? Okay, anything else from the board?
I
Okay,
would make a motion that we approve the letter of support for the Safe Streets and Roads for All Planning and Administration Grant proposal.
I second. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any
Aye.
nays? Motion passes unanimously, first by Commissioner Kuzmiak, second by Carter. Thank you. We'll go on to the next agenda item, which I think is you, Dave. Right?
Yeah, this one's mine. Here to give you an update on our 2024 neighborhood traffic management program. I'm sorry, I don't have a presentation, but I have some information to share, and hopefully you've had a chance to look through the memo. But for those that are not aware about our program, we have about $200,000 a year to help, basically to help lower speeds in residential neighborhoods. So we have utilized various techniques to do so, including education. We did an education campaign a few years ago. We've spent some money on targeted enforcement, and also have done some traffic calming projects. So we revamped the policy a few years ago to include all these different strategies. And we are just here this year wrapping up the first neighborhood project over in Old West Lawrence. So that's been a project that's been going for about 4 years now, from the data collection to the implementation of various permanent traffic calming devices in that neighborhood. Essentially last year, we did a call for projects, for neighborhood projects, again, and we received about 27 applications that were that met the goal of the policy to look at traffic calming in neighborhoods. We did data collection through most of last fall, and a little here this spring on those requests against to look at the speed and volume on those streets with our policy, in respect to our policy. We held an open house in the beginning of March, invited all of those that had submitted applications, listened to some of their concerns, got some more feedback in relation to the criteria and the speed and volume data that we had collected. So that was kind of a valuable piece of community engagement that helped us get some more feedback. We made some adjustments to the evaluation and the scoring criteria on a number of streets, which I've kind of detailed those in the memo. Also collected some speed data on a couple of other streets. Highland and Hilltop were a couple, and then we added Sunset Drive and Emory Road, which were also kind of part of looking at other streets in those neighborhoods. So what I want to share with you here, I'll just share kind of a couple of attachments to the memo that let's see here. Sure. Okay. There we go. Hopefully that's working. So here's a revised map that shows all of the locations. So when we had the open house, this map didn't have any colors. It just had all of the locations that we looked at. Since then, we've looked at the data, got some revised data, looked at the data in accordance with our policy, and essentially kind of grouped them into a couple of different areas. So the red locations are streets that don't meet the threshold in our policy. And so that's one of two things. Either the speed of traffic is greater than 5 miles per hour over the average speed of traffic is 5 miles per hour or greater over the posted speed, or the traffic volumes exceed 1,000 vehicles per day. And so if either of those criteria are met, it meets the policy. If neither of them are met, but they're both met to 80% of the threshold, then it could still meet the policy. So that it may not meet it in one or the other, but if 80% of both the speed and volume criteria is met, it still would meet our policy. So after reviewing the additional data, we kind of broke it into a couple of different categories. The red are the streets that don't meet the policy. And then there's either one of two things in our policy. It's what we call a neighborhood project or a minor project. So a minor project, I will start with that, are streets that would be perceived to not affect other streets. For instance, if you look on the map here, Inverness Drive is a through street between Bob Billings and Clinton Parkway, where there's not any other streets here in this neighborhood that has a direct connection. So if we did traffic calming on Inverness, it would likely not affect other neighborhood streets. So it's kind of basically an isolated project. And you can see some of these other ones in green are similar to that. And I would say a lot of them are kind of collector type streets and not residential streets. A couple of them are. Conza Drives over here is a residential street, but these other streets, Harvard, Overland, George Williams, Inverness, Leonard, are collector type streets. So that's the minor project. And then the other criteria, if it met, is a neighborhood project. So neighborhood projects are projects where we want to look at the bigger picture. I would say that if we did traffic calming on one street, it may affect other streets in the neighborhood. So a good example of that, there was really two what we call neighborhood projects from this last application phase. One was it's several neighborhoods, but it's all here west of the university, University Heights, Raintree, and West Hills neighborhood. These streets in yellow, all of these streets met the criteria, and really we felt like all of these need to be treated as a neighborhood project, so that we need to be thinking, if we're going to do a treatment on Stratford, we need to know what the effect could be on University, and vice versa, and some of these other streets in the neighborhood. So similar to the Old West Lawrence project, that was a neighborhood project. The other project that we felt were the other streets that met a neighborhood project level is over here, Indiana Street and 4th Street. So those were the only two streets that were specifically identified and we got criteria on. But we felt if we're going to do anything on these streets, we need to look at some of the adjacent streets. It's Grid Network over here in the Pinckney neighborhood. And so, that was something too that we thought would be a neighborhood project. So this map here corresponds to what I'm going to share here is our table. And so the same colors on that map correspond to this table, which is in the attachment. And this kind of shows you a ranking with the points for each of these streets. You can see the yellow, Ingle, University, Stratford, West Hills, Emory, those were those streets there just west of KU. 3 of the 5 scored very high. The top 2 were over in that neighborhood. And then you can see some of the other streets in green, the minor projects. We got Overland Drive, Crestline Drive, George Williams, Harvard, all had pretty high total points. So this is like one of the, I guess, the starting factors for us to kind of look at, does it meet our criteria? And then how do we go about making improvements? So some of that is just based off of the budget and staff capacity. And so we haven't done a project, you know, like I mentioned, the Old West Lawrence project was the first year. It was the first one that we've done, neighborhood project, which took a few years. We haven't done another one of those. So we felt that beginning the engagement process for the streets in yellow was something that we could start here this year. So that's something that we plan to do this fall. And we have about $150,000 left in our budget. And we're targeting Crestline Drive as the street to look at putting traffic calming on here this year. I would note Overland Drive is about a point, I guess, higher. But based off of, that's the section of Overland Drive in front of Free State High School. We're looking at putting in a school flashing beacon over there already. So we want to look at doing that first and getting additional data before we do anything else over there. And also, if we're going to do something, we're going to need to do for permanent traffic calming, do it in the summer months when the high schools does not have classes. So we wouldn't be able to do that this year. And felt like the Crestline Drive project and doing traffic calming on that street would be something that, you know, we could see results here relatively quickly and get a project at least encumbered this year with the budget we have left. This is general fund dollars that we really need to get obligated in this calendar year, and kind of fits the budget that we feel like with that budget we can get that street improved. So that's kind of where we're at right now with the program. We're at the phase now where we would go forward and do some temporary traffic calming devices on Crestline, look at the speeds that if it had an impact, and before we did any permanent devices. So we're going to be looking at doing that here later this year. And then, like I said, beginning the engagement process on the streets here in yellow. And yeah, that's really kind of what I had. And if there's any other questions about the program or the whole program or kind of the process we went through, I'd be glad to try to answer them. Our project engineer, Dustin Smith, who is leading this program, left the city a couple of months ago, and he was kind of instrumental in coordinating the applications and the data collection. But I would also say it's been a large team effort, and our MPO planning staff has helped out in the public engagement, and our public information officer as well has helped out in the public engagement process. So it's been a kind of a group effort to get here to this point, and we're just getting ready to move forward. So with that, I would stop for any questions you may have.
Steve, this might be reflected in the table, but on the map, the numbers on the circles, that reflects the score. Is that right?
So it does not reflect the score. It's just an identifier to the application we received. I don't know anything more than that, how they got assigned, but there was a number of applications that we got that weren't really related to the program. And, you know, if someone turned in something that wanted a stop sign or something that may not have been applicable to the program, but that's probably why the numbers jump around. And we only had 27 applications, but they just got all assigned different numbers. So they're just the identifiers.
Thanks. Other questions, comments?
Interesting that the neighborhood projects the yellow ones are kind of clustered in one area. Were you surprised by that, or was that what you expected to see? Anecdotally, that doesn't feel like an area where I would have expected to need traffic calming, but I also don't live there and don't drive there that much.
Well, I would say, and I'll just pull up my map again here, so everyone's looking at it, or not the map, but the table. But I was not surprised, especially with University and Stratford, because those have been streets between Iowa and campus that they're direct shots to the university, and they've routinely been identified for traffic calming in the past, even before the policy was revised. And I would also add that even though we right now don't have funding to do traffic calming on all of these streets, right now in the budget, it would probably take more than one budgeted year of our program if we're going to continue on to be able to have programmed funds about $200,000 a year. But something also that's going to be subject of discussion with the university, with additional development that's going on there with the Gateway project, and the neighborhood has already been engaged in conversations with the university through some of the development that's proposed in that area. So that's hopefully also something that the city could partner with the university on. And those are streets that have long been issues, I guess I would say, for concerns with speed and volume. It's a residential neighborhood. Ingle Road, I was a little surprised at how much greater the speed was. It's 10 miles over the posted speed limit. But that's in the same neighborhood. So yeah, I think it does deserve warrant as a neighborhood project, just because we don't want to be doing some traffic calming on some streets that may affect speed or volumes on some other streets. So we've had conversations with representatives in the neighborhood, and I think they would agree as well that like the neighborhood project approach is the best way to look at improving that speeds in the neighborhood.
I'd be curious to know what other university towns, so to speak, have done to address that issue, because it is, it's curious that so many of those neighborhood projects, or all those neighborhood projects I'm looking at the map, seem to be concentrated right where you've got, I imagine the convergence of, like you said, neighborhood streets, and then also younger drivers with different driving norms, potentially from different parts of this, the country, just kind of intersecting. And so I do think it's an interesting combination of factors to have to address right all around that area. It's not really a question, but just a curiosity and a comment, I guess.
Dave, there was you might have already talked about Pinckney, but when I was looking at the evaluation table, I'm getting back to it down a lot, but I was looking at the crashes, and looks like ones out west on Harvard Road. I'm looking at non-property crashes, but like Overland Road, Harvard, George Williams, and then there was one up on, where is it? Let me see. Is it? Well, it's in Pinckney. Oh, it's on West 4th Street. And it scored higher as a result, I think, because there was another. I don't know. Is there something happening with Pinckney? I'm sorry, my thoughts are a little disjointed as I'm looking at the table.
Well, there's nothing currently happening. We just identified that as a future neighborhood project.
Okay.
like I said, the other one's in yellow. And here on the table, it's just in blue to show that it's a, different project. But it would be that right now, as it stands, it would be the next neighborhood project after we accomplished completing a project with the streets in yellow. So
Got it.
any of the streets projects that met criteria will remain, I guess, sit on the list until we have budgeted funds to complete a project. And so we, I guess, would add that we would probably do our next call for projects next year in 2026. And then, there could be other locations that then would get scored and ranked with all of the other streets that have already met the criteria.
Thanks. And because we were talking about I'm sorry, I'm so low here. Coming into, entrances into campus. I'm looking at Haskell and the Barker Lane and Leonard Lane or Avenue. They don't score very high. But I did notice Barker Lane had like 10 crashes on it, but didn't score high in the other categories. Or Barker Avenue, I'm sorry. I don't know if there's been any contemplation or engagement with Haskell about, sort of the feeders that are coming into Haskell.
Yeah, we haven't had any conversations with Haskell. We just responded to the request and evaluated those streets. And although Barker didn't meet the criteria, I would say that stretch of Barker between 19th and 23rd already has some traffic calming on it. It has the islands and the median islands. So.
Yep. Thanks. Any other comments from board members? Okay, any public comment on this item? Okay, hearing none. I think we would need a motion to approve the neighborhood planning traffic management.
Yeah, there's not an action item or request to approve, but what we will do is following our process. So I would say on the website, I'll share this too, this is a pretty handy guide and flow chart of how we follow through with our process here. Share. So we're kind of up here. And this is the neighborhood project refinement of, the next steps would be to establish a working group and determine treatment options, and then present options to the public, make a recommendation. When we set this up, it was the Multimodal Transportation Commission, but now this is kind of the board, I think, that would oversee that recommendation, use temporary devices and then kind of follow this flow chart. So if it meets the criteria, we kind of come down here and go to the permanent devices and come back through the Connected City Board and City Commission for approval before construction. So that's the neighborhood project. The minor project's a little more straightforward, where we're kind of right in here. We would then go to project evaluation, determine if it meets the criteria, which would be lowering speeds for volume, and then make a recommendation back to the Connected City Board later on. So you would be kind of seeing this later on before any permanent project is going forward. So, but this is just kind of an update on where we're at. It's been a year, and it took us a while to get the data, but we're just kind of following the process as we've been able to get time to do so, and we're going to just keep on moving forward with it and hopefully get another project done this year. So that's exciting.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Thanks for taking this this project over. I know, but you've got a lot on your plate already. So appreciate your work on it. Okay, I don't think that there's then, because there's no action needed from the board, we'll move on to the calendar.
Yeah, I believe we've got items for our June meeting that we're considering, and I don't know if Melinda would like to kind of talk about that because it's going to be CIP, I believe.
Yes, I'd be happy to. Melinda Harger, Assistant Director, MSO. So we will be taking the 2026 through 2030 capital improvement plan to the City Commission on Tuesday, June 17th is what's slated. So our thoughts are, the agenda would post the Thursday before, which is the 12th. We would also be posting for our Connected City agenda, which would be scheduled in June. And so the thought is we would bring the CIP to this group as well to kind of dig into specific Connected City related projects and answer any questions. I would say for the most part, the projects that were funded last year are 95% of what's going to be shown funded in this next CIP. There are some funds that did not perform. The numbers didn't come in to match some of the projections, so we're actually having to reduce funding in a couple areas, like our street maintenance program is looking at needing to reduce what we thought in some of those outer years we could spend on street maintenance. And there were a large number of new projects, over 40 new projects had been proposed. But unfortunately, with kind of where the budget constraints are, there wasn't an opportunity to bring a lot of those new projects into the funded list. So there were a handful of stormwater projects we'll be able to highlight where we had initially put funding in into buckets for just the general program. We'll be able to dig into those a little bit, where now we've identified specific projects. And then same on a couple of street projects where before, we would have just had that money identified in the street maintenance program. We're calling out specific projects that have kind of gone up in priority. So we've identified those, but we'll have more information on after it's been taken to an exec team this week, and the direction from the city manager's office, and can share that with all of you and answer questions. So I think that was going to be our primary item for the June Connected City meeting.
Thanks, Melinda. Is there anything that's been posted about the CIP yet? I don't know.
No, there was a call for projects, back in February, and then it went through March, some of that early analysis of looking and verifying budgets and timing and all that. And then it went through peer review for all the new projects. And then what we've been doing the last 2 to 4 weeks, the committee has met a couple times digging into specific funding sources and what the projects look like over those 5 years. So there's been a lot happening kind of behind the scenes, but nothing really will go public until Thursday the 12th, which is that Thursday before the commission meeting.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you. And then in July, it looks like we'll be talking about permits, stormwater equivalency residential units.
Yeah, that'll be my items I'll bring to you for the land disturbance permit, which is part of the new land development code. And then our stormwater equivalency residential units is also part of the stormwater rate structure and the rate analysis. So we may have some information that may be a little bit more comprehensive besides just the ERU update. But I think the ERU and the stormwater rate discussion will be the majority of that agenda. Land disturbance permit should be a fairly succinct update. That's something that's taken effect in June. So we'll have actually a little bit of report back about how things are going with that.
That's good. Thanks, Trevor. And also, Trevor, I have to thank you for giving us those tours. I really loved the wastewater treatment plant. I thought it was so rad and had a ton of questions for you. It was Jay, right? Who was there?
Yep, Jay. Jay was our wastewater treatment manager. We were happy to do it.
He was
And
awesome.
it was a little busy with all the construction going on. It'll be a different tour once that's all done for sure.
That was great. Thank you. Okay. Then it sounds like we're on to adjournment. Do I hear a motion to adjourn, or is there a motion to adjourn? A motion to adjourn the May 19th, 2025 Connected City Advisory Board meeting.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Bye.
Aye. Any nays? Nope. Okay. Motion passes. I mean, it's not a motion. It was just adjourning.
Hi, everyone.
All right.
Bye all. Thank you all so much.
Bye. Thank you guys.